That was John Cleese making his entrance as the sheriff in a new western, Silverado. We'll also be seeing him later this year in Clockwise, a comedy film by Michael Frayn. Since the appearance of Monty Python's Flying Circus in 1969, Cleese has established himself as one of the greats of television comedy, most notably for the creation of Basil Fawlty in Fawlty Towers, the second series of which can be seen again soon on the BBC. We talked to Cleese about Basil, about Python, and some of his less familiar ventures. He's been involved in a series of training films for business and industry with a video arts company. He's recently presented a party political broadcast, and he's written a book, Families and How to Survive Them, with his psychotherapist, Robin Skinner. We begin, however, in Weston-super-Mare.
Dad sold insurance. He used to describe himself on forms as a marine underwriter because when he'd been out in the East, and he had a very interesting early life, he'd been in marine insurance for the Union of Canton Insurance Company. He had an interesting life because he went off to fight the First World War. And that was incidentally also when he changed the family name, because he was born Reginald Cheese. My grandfather was John Edwin Cheese, who was a solicitor's clerk, but a very crafty one who owned the entire office block in which he worked as a solicitor's clerk. Unfortunately, the family story went, he put the money into railways instead of into beer, so we never had any. We literally had nothing except Dad's salary in the 50s, which was 30 quid a week, which was quite comfortable. I mean, we had a little Austin 10, and Dad used to just drive around Somerset selling insurance. And
was that the circuit? Was it insurance, accountancy, solicitors, clerks?
That's
was that
right.
Your father's friend, mother's friends? And
that's right. And the reason I think why accountancy used to feature so hugely in my sketches is that from the age of 15 there was this enormous, very gentle pressure, because my parents were very kind, but there was a huge gentle pressure to become an accountant.
Do you see your background as having provided you with some terrific targets?
Yes. I think it also, I felt at times that it enables me to feel as though I'm in tune with what's going on in England. I don't think I feel that anymore because I think I'm too old now. But there was a stage when I felt that very strongly because there's a sign of typicalness about where I came from. I see it in a funny kind of way as being archetypally British middle class or lower middle class. I think you feel that there is an enormous pressure to conform and to be respectable and not to shock. And I think a lot of what I've been doing is attempting to escape from that. At the same time, there's a very strong Puritan work ethic. Very, very strong. I think people find it terribly hard really to enjoy themselves. And I think that that's something that's been with me a long, long time. You very seldom saw people in Weston-super-Mare really kissing each other. I mean, husbands and wives sort of pecked each other on the forehead, you know, or patted each other on the hand. It was that very distant thing, as though emotion could come along and send everything spinning off out of control. And I think that's why, certainly I have always had this feeling that my emotions were rather held in.
Self-repression and externally applied repression.
That's right.
And the escape from that is some spasm of anger, violence.
Well, I think why
or an reaction of fear as well, isn't it?
Well, yes, fear's there certainly, but I think one of the reasons why Basil Fawlty was a very successful creation in the long run was that he embodied a kind of thing that the English feel sometimes, which is that because they can't say, I'm sorry, this food is not good enough, or I bought this pair of shoes, I want you to replace it. You know, because they can't do these simple acts of self-assertion, they tend to become on the surface a kind of brittle politeness, and underneath a lot of seething rage. And I think that so many people in England feel this, that was one of the reasons why they could identify with Basil, also find him funny, and at the same time quite like him, because he's a monster. And yet people feel quite affectionately about him, which is a very strange paradox.
One of the things about the performance that you give as Basil is that you as an actor use his body a great deal to make effect. You are very tall and you can...
Well, I do move oddly. I mean, I wish I was...
But you move even more oddly in Fawlty Towers.
Well, slightly, but I wish I was a lovely mover, and I'm not. And I don't have to exaggerate it much, unfortunately, to look like Basil. I remember the first time I ever saw myself, which was in New Zealand, where we were doing this 63 show, and we were there in 64, and the New Zealand Broadcasting Company came and taped it, and it is a most extraordinary experience seeing yourself on tape for the first time, because nothing is as you perceive it. And I looked like a cross between a sort of giraffe and a hovercraft, because I moved along as though I was on an air cushion, with the top half of me sort of waving very slightly from side to side. But the gestures I made were terribly small. If I pointed at things, I was doing this, look at that. And at the same time, I talked almost the whole time without moving my lips at all. So a very strange creature, which had nothing to do with me at all, and was me.
You were very tall, very young, weren't you?
Very tall, very young. I was 6 foot when I was 12. Taller than all the teachers in my prep school when I was 12. And this, I remember one of them referring to me as a prominent citizen, and everybody laughing. And the trouble about being very tall is you can't withdraw into the background. You were there. At the same time, I was an only child and really quite solitary in my habits until I got to prep school. And I wasn't well liked at all. In fact, I was quite badly bullied because, although nobody can believe this, was a very meek and rather indecisive and bullyable side to me. I remember my father arriving once to say hello, you know, to bring me something, and he found 3 boys sitting on top of me to chase them away. So I was this rather strange, elongated, solitary, and rather bullied object. And although I was never very naughty, because I was too cowardly really to take real risks, I was never beaten in my entire 10 years, you know, and that's pretty rare. Nevertheless, I was able to be naughty enough, and by making people laugh in that subversive way that, in a sense, I've gone on doing all my life, I gained popularity and was liked.
In 1953, aged 14, Cleese became a day boy at Clifton College, a public school in Bristol.
The thing about Clifton was it was not an unkind school, but there was a complete lack of any real excitement of an intellectual nature. And I think most of the lessons that I was taught, which was there was a sort of mythical house spirit and school spirit and
Christian spirit.
Christian spirit and all this business about lying. I remember, you know, lying was considered very bad, and then the school inspectors came, and one of the masters said, no, whatever question I ask you, put your hands up. But if you know the answer, put your right hand up. And I began to realize this law against lying was merely administrative inconvenience, you know. I mean, it was nothing to do with morality. And I think we were given absolutely no idea at all about how to live our lives by what I regard as, in the light of sensible principles. Nobody ever suggests how you might handle something if you felt sad. Nobody would ever talk about emotions at all. So I think we came out quite unequipped to deal healthily with normal life.
Were you yourself bored most of the time, as a child?
Yeah, I've been bored most of my life, as I've begun to realize the last few months. So it just happens to be something that's bubbling to the surface up here at the moment. Yes, I was bored. I never knew what I wanted to do. And because I was quite good at maths, when I got to Clifton, I got put down the tube that said maths, physics, and chemistry. And I emerged at the other end, holding 3 A-levels, thinking, you know, what was that about? And then I got a place at Cambridge.
You went to read law, you're switching away from...
Yeah, I switched to law because I didn't know what to do. So again, I went on doing 3 years of something that I wasn't interested in, appeared with a piece of paper at the end saying, you are a BA, you know. And nobody ever asked me, having been told my entire life how important all these qualifications were, nobody ever asked me what I got or what my O-levels were. It's very strange.
While at Cambridge, Cleese began to write and perform with the Footlights Club, alongside Bill Oddie, Tim Brooke-Taylor and Graham Chapman. Looking back now on Cambridge with this very male, a particular class of male, a particular sort of English male, a club, what were you after as a group? I know you were after making people laugh.
Yes, well, the trouble was, it's very hard to see that we were after anything else. We reacted, all of us, very strongly against any kind of didactic purpose and laughed at it, thought it was rather awful. I think some of us, certainly myself, were almost inconceivably inexperienced so far as women were concerned. And therefore what would have been very little point in writing about women, since they were from another planet as far as I was concerned, except insofar as I'd seen them on screen, like I was able to parody a Somerset Maugham-type heroine in one scene. But it's very hard for me to characterize my early humor because I pinched it from everyone. I mean, I got the idea of a parody of Somerset Maugham because I saw somebody else parodying him, you know? And then when I first started to write for BBC Radio, I did a series of conversations at a bus stop for Dick Emery and Derek Guyler. And in fact, they were, I don't think I've ever told Peter Cook this, but they were all based on Peter Cook's, yeah, well, it was pre-Pete and Dud, actually. It was all based on Peter Cook's interesting facts sketch. And he comes and tells the man these interesting facts, which I finally, to my great delight, actually did with him in a Secret Policeman Ball kind of 20 years later.
After leaving Cambridge, Cleese toured with the Footlights Revue, Cambridge Circus. He also worked for BBC Radio and was featured in the television series The Frost Report and, at last, The 1948 Show, which starred Cleese, Marty Feldman, Tim Brooke-Taylor and Graham Chapman, and was very much a precursor of Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Almost everything I wrote up to about the time I left BBC was derivative of someone else. And then I think I began to find a little bit of a star, which was based on the fact that I discovered that people could take much harder jokes than were current at that time. Now, with all the young comics now, they won't know what I'm talking about because they do have hard humor. But people were much more cautious in the early 60s about doing slightly hard jokes, jokes that implied something to do with rage or hatred or real envy or, you know, something that was a bit nasty. I can just think of those the first time I heard the nun jokes, you know. Yeah. I mean, I made a number up. What was it? What is black and white and crawls along the ground? A wounded nun. I mean, I thought that was hysterical. I used to laugh at that out in the street for about a fortnight every time I thought of it. Then I started making them up. You know, what is black and white and black and off-white and black and light brown and black and sepia and black and brown and black and black. The answer is a nun on a spit or something. I could just, you know, and that sort of hard edge to the joke didn't frighten me, and it frightened some of the executives. They'd say, should we do that? And I managed to talk them into doing it, and then it would get a laugh, and they'd think, oh, it was all right. So I could see that people could, as I said, dissociate themselves from the nasty thing and simply see the thing as an abstract idea. But it was very interesting that sometimes people couldn't. For example, we did a marvellous little send-up. It was a time when Sam Peckinpah was making movies in which arms were blown off every 15 seconds, and we decided that we would do Sam Peckinpah's version of Salad Days.
Was there a sense in which you and Graham Chapman worked together in the Monty Python, one
absolutely.
Side of it, whereas Terry Jones and Michael Palin wrote on another side of it. Could you characterize the distinctions in terms of helping to characterize your own work?
Yes, I mean, we used to write parodies of each other's sketches. Mike and Terry's sketches always started with long pans over countryside with romantic music in the background, and then probably a Viking or someone appearing on a horse, and the thing developing slightly lyrically and with a much more visual slant that Graham and I had. And our sketches would consist of people coming in and abusing each other out of thesauruses, basically. We both found abuse very, very funny, and we loved people arguing and fighting and being rude to each other. And we love also the possibilities of language in that situation, because when you start getting just a little bit more recherche in your vocabulary and at the same time having the actors very, you know, very angry, something very funny happens, I think.
Why do you think you find abuse and savagery funny?
Oh, I should assume it's because I've had great difficulty with anger myself, and that by laughing at anger in this way, I make it less dangerous for myself. I'm pretty sure that's right. But I'm sure I didn't know that for years. There was a lot of anger in all of us, and a fair amount of paranoia in the group, and plenty of envy. A lot of envy, because we'd never talked about anything that any of us did outside the group. It was a kind of taboo, and I started trying to break it a few years ago by deliberately, in front of everyone else, asking people, what have you been doing, you know? And we do it now. But there was a time where it was absolutely taboo to mention any project you've been working on outside the group while the other group members were there. So there was a lot of strong emotion, and I think that we could have fun with it and to some extent make it less frightening by laughing at it.
There were certain things that that you did out of just silliness, which then developed into the fish slapping dance and things like that, weren't they? Which were just done for the...
I mean, those, you know, Gumby, that all came out of the fact that I had this Vox Pop to camera, and I just couldn't see how to make it the slightest bit interesting, but I had to shoot it in 20 minutes. I ran back to the wardrobe van and simply put this outfit on and just did the whole Vox Pop as though I was terribly angry about something that was unspecified. What we did normally was written and performed as written and structured. And that we were at our silliest when we were just got the camera and hadn't had a chance to write something in a formal sense. Do you want to come back to my place? You're all right. Which I think is glorious. It's so... I don't know where it comes from. But you know, if you put that down on paper, it probably wouldn't have survived the reading process.
Why do you think you were particularly drawn to authority figures? I mean, you're very at home playing people in authority.
Well, I think firstly because I could play them easily, you see. I mean, I'd had the training that those authority figures have. If you've been to Clifton and Cambridge, it would be very easy to become a barrister, you know, or a very upper echelon businessman or a conservative politician, or, you know, it's very easy to do those. So all I had was to put a suit on, I had the right accent, I could play them. So that's one of the reasons I wrote. Second thing is I realized very, very early on that if somebody, a character that you're going to write is going to do that, then it's funny if he's head of the Secret Service and not funny if he's a milkman. So that the more authority that you give these characters, the more that they have hanging on them, the more people's lives depend on how they're going to act, then the funnier it is when they do a bit of that. Yeah. So that's two. Now, wait a minute, there was a third. Oh, and the other thing is, I think it's the mother-dominated thing. You see, I mean, I would definitely say that people who have very good relationships with their fathers see that authority can be good as well as bad. They can see, and I think that's the ideal situation. So this authority is being exercised intelligently, this is not being exercised intelligently. So they have a choice about what they're rebellious about. Yeah. I think a lot of people who grow up either in families where the father is absolutely awful, and I could name some MPs on the far left here, or who grow up where the mother is all dominant, the father's a rather wimpy figure, just have a feeling deep down that all authority is wrong all of the time, and they're the sort of compulsive rebels who have no choice about what they're going to complain about. They'll just whinge about authority the whole time, and anybody says anything about anyone in authority or any kind of authority, they raise their eyes to heaven, knowing that all authority is wrong at all times. And I think I used to belong to that camp.
And you went for confrontation a lot. There seemed a stage in your writing where the greatest wrong in human society was the impossibility of getting good service in a shop.
Well, I began to realize it was true for a start. But I particularly got interested in that because I started to make the films for Video Arts and became very interested about this thing called business. Yeah. That 90% of the British population spends all its time doing, that us folks in the arts, the creative ones, narrowly defined to make us feel special, the creative ones know nothing about business. And I found it very interesting sitting down with a couple of smashing, very bright girls who taught everybody how to sell across the counter at Marks and Spencer's, and they were terrific. And what they told me about psychology in 2 hours was solid gold.
10 minutes I've been here, and I'm in a hurry.
Well, you've got to wait your turn, haven't you?
What?
You can't just swan in and get served like that. I mean, we're busy.
Swan in? I might tell you I've been a customer of this bank for 30 years.
Come on. What do you want? There's people waiting.
How dare you speak to me like that?
Just because you've got a fancy tie doesn't make you more important than the others, you know. Now, what do you want?
I want to see the manager. I refuse to put up with this impertinence.
Well, I'm afraid...
Wrong. The bank now has one very angry, very time-consuming customer because Brian couldn't handle him, because he didn't react like a professional. Instead of staying cool, he allowed himself to get personally involved. So he was rude, and rudeness never works. So, rule 1, don't get personally involved. Stay a professional distance.
I've got 2 gifts. It's one that I can be funny, given enough time, as opposed to spontaneously in interviews. And 2, that I've got a logical mind, which was quite good at science and law. And that this has given me in the past the ability to get the structure of things right and to make them. Dear Marty Feldman, when I first met Marty, he went on at great length about what he used to call the internal logic of a sketch, which is that you could have everybody sitting in dustbins or dressed as carrots, but if somebody walks into the room who isn't dressed as a carrot or who isn't wheeled in a dustbin, then you have to explain why not. See what I mean? So you start with anything, no matter how crazy, but that it's got to be founded on that in solid logic. But I think I realized that there's a kind of natural progress that seems to happen with a lot of comedy writers. It's almost clearest in Woody Allen, which is that for the first 10, 15 years, sort of 22 to 35, you're happy doing sketches, and then a bit of you becomes hungry to do something meatier. Now, once you move on to something meatier, you get involved in problems, not just of plot and story, but of kind of consistency of material. And I think in a way, without being that conscious of it, the last 3 or 4 years, when I've written very, very little, really the book with Robin is one of the only major things and a few things for Meaning of Life. I've been pursuing this and trying to sort out what I really do think about things in general. Working with Robin in particular, I've seen that there are some ideas, some ways of living which seem to me to lead people towards a much happier life, and these are not very widely known. I meet people who are highly educated, but they seem strangely ignorant about really quite basic psychological, psychiatric ideas, particularly this particular one about paranoia and projection. So if we have a great deal of anger and hatred, which we do not know about, we project it into other people. And that then justifies us to use our own anger and hatred. I mean, when you start viewing the way that politicians in particular behave, in the light of the sort of ideas that Robin has taught me through doing the book, it becomes deeply, deeply funny.
Such as?
Well, I think when you start hearing them abusing each other. I saw this bit about Dennis Skinner in which he said he thought that all people who were in the alliance were scabs, traitors, or scum.
That about covers the field.
I don't know what to say. Is that just them, or, you know? And if you said to Dennis Skinner, in your lot, is there any envy, any desire for power? I guarantee you would say, no, we want to do good things for the people. You know? And that just gets funnier and funnier. Not least because people don't throw tomatoes at them. Or buckets of water. You know? And people actually sit there and say, doing his best for all of us. And when Margaret Thatcher goes on television with that performance that she does now, which has got nothing to do with a live human being at all. I mean, it's all been taught. I don't know who's taught it, but somebody said, put your head on one side, they don't talk so fast. Try and pitch your voice low, don't sound so strident. You know, relax more. Take a few deep breaths. Talk even slower, put your head more on one side, and what comes out, people will sit there watching it. I mean, I get more laughs from that now than I do from comedy shows. Best definition I ever read was Bergson in Laughter, and he says, laughter is a social sanction against rigid behavior. Non-flexible behavior, behavior that's not really well adapted to the situation. It's a social sanction, which brings in the idea that it's a group reaction, disapproving of something. I think that almost anything that we would think of as egotistical is funny, because we are suddenly seized with lust, or anger, or envy, or hatred, or silliness, or whatever, excessive sadness. You know, inappropriate mourning. We're seized with an emotion which takes us over and which we no longer have any control over, so that we no longer have any flexibility about whether our behavior is intelligent or not. So, in a nutshell, funnily enough, I think what's funny are the 7 deadly sins, because they're the great sins of egotism. And I think the wonderful thing about being around someone like Christ, who I suspect was free of egotism to us in an incredible degree, was that in any circumstances his behavior would have been so light and flexible. He could just have moved from feeling to feeling without needing to respond to them or anything. And he would have been completely free of these lunatic obsessions that we're all caught with.
Is it too crass to say how do you square that with the send-up of the crucifixion at the end of the life of Brian?
In the life of Brian, I mean, we were making fun of the way people follow religious leaders. We weren't making fun of religious leaders themselves. That's why we showed Christ in the first part of the film, to establish this was not Christ. But Brian was someone whom people followed as though he was a Messiah.
And I'd just like to add on a personal note my own admiration for what you're doing for us, Brian, and what must be, after all, for you, a very difficult time. Ridge, what are you going to do? Goodbye, Brian, and thanks.
The trouble is that that crucifix is a symbol of Christ, and what we're really saying in there is maybe death isn't so terrible. Maybe, as the Buddhists say, it's a final letting go. And that's rather nice when you think about it that way. I think maybe when you've had a good full life, tragedies, people die young, but I think when you've had a good full life, maybe you think, okay, I've had my innings if you're English, you know, and it was okay, and now it's time to go. And you could feel okay about it. Maybe even go with a smile. Stories about the Roman amphitheater, where you remember the guy who designed this bronze bull, and the great joke was you put someone inside it and put a fire underneath, you see, and then they go, and it sounded like a bull lowing, and he thought it was just terribly funny. So I'm delighted to say they put him in. And as he went, and it sounded like a bull lowing, the Romans sitting around the amphitheater laughed. So what we're talking about is very cultural, a sense of humor. And I think that I couldn't make jokes about a recent disaster or about something like cancer, because there would be no chance, even if I did find a way of making a joke about it, there would be no chance people would see what the joke was that I was making. They would think I was making another one. W.C. Fields, somebody bet him he couldn't make people laugh at a blind man, and he was very clever because he made the blind man a threat. I have a blind spot on most sexual jokes and innuendo jokes, which I think are terrible, terrible, and embarrassing.
Yeah, embarrass me, blue jokes.
Yeah, blue jokes,
I think that's because
right.
I'm prudish. But,
well, I wonder if there's a prudish streak in me, but I used to think it was that, and as I've sort of become more and more degenerate, I've come to the conclusion that I'm not particularly prudish, but that a lot of people are incredibly uptight about sex and watching some, I mean, the wee-wee jokes, the poo-poo jokes, the fart jokes. So you think, how can this be so funny? I mean, you could create a situation where something about that could be funny because of the context. You know, you can always do that, but the sheer lack of discrimination with which so many people laugh at those jokes leaves me kind of breathless. So that's a particular quirk, kink in myself.
how would you describe Basil?
He's very depressed. And I think that the reason that people feel sympathy, or even, it's almost inconceivable, liking for this poor monster, is that they sense that he's not in control of his own life. And I once did a kind of quick little popularity poll on the characters, and the most popular character is Manuel. And the kids identify with Manuel amazingly. And I'm sure that's because Manuel's seen as having no control over his life at all. Most in control, and in a sense least liked, although perhaps most admired as a performance, is Prue. Because Sybil seems to be running the show. And so there's not much spare sympathy, which is, I think that's quite interesting. It tells us a lot about how people respond to other people, that it's helplessness that really makes us feel good about them, you know? And if they can look after themselves, we don't like them. And in Fawlty Towers, Connie and I used to spend enormous quantities of time on the plot. I mean, most people will write a half hour in 10 days top whack, and a lot of them will tell you, provided there's nobody from the company employing them around, they write them in a week. Well, Connie and I used to take 6 weeks of Fawlty Towers, and we just started with this huge sheet of paper. They always used to write, because there was never room to get everything in. We used to write, they get that drawing paper. Yeah. And we'd start writing one or two things down, like an idea at the beginning and maybe an idea in the middle. And we would go through it and have other ideas we put off at the side, and ever so slowly, over 2 weeks, a plot would be constructed.
Was there any time when you were writing them that you said to yourself, oh, that's the way, that's the formula, that's the sort of way we do it?
No, not a formula. There were certain things we took pride in.
Yeah.
I was thinking as you were saying that. We always took pride in trying not to let the audience guess what was going to happen. And we realized the way around that was that in most comedy, the plot comes plot, and you can spot that a bit of plot has been put in. So whenever we were getting plot points across, or establishing something that was absolutely necessary to lead on to the final direction of the story, we would always make it as funny as possible, so that people thought it had been put in because it was funny. But at the same time, they would absorb the point, the plot point.
You keep talking about the plot, but there are several plots, half a dozen,
Yes,
where you have
that's right.
5 or 6 adventures setting out. And
When
then
you try and get 2 or 3, we used to get 2 or 3, sometimes 4, but probably 2 or 3 threads, and then at a particular point they come together.
Yeah.
And then they start playing off each other, and they may not just come together and run, they may sort of come together and overlap a little bit, and then 2 and 3 may touch, and then 3 and 1 may touch, but basically they start separate on separate tracks and then start weaving. And of course the best ones are where they all come together right at the end, like with Mrs. Richards, The Deaf Person, which I watched with my daughter about a week ago. It's very satisfactory, all the things that have been set up. When he finally has to tell her that the money is his, and he turns to Manuel, you know, and he says, just tell her the money's mine. And Manuel says, I know nothing. In which Basil told him to say 20 minutes before. You know, it's just the satisfaction of it all just touching it, just at the end. You just see the poor guy being put into more and more uncomfortable and terrible situations the whole time. Connie and I would laugh till the tears ran down our face, but we would always ache for him, because, you know, we were really like 2 gods. We were writing this man's life and making it absolutely, it's awful, and he never had a chance. But the funny thing is, I did realize this years ago, that it's no good having somebody behaving crazily. What is much, much funnier is watching somebody, watching someone who's behaving crazily. I like physical acting. I think sometimes if you can do something with a movement of the back or the head or something like that, or even a facial expression, it's always funnier than something verbal. It goes in deeper, at a deeper level. I have been complimented on my gestures by the chief psychiatrist at Broadmoor. But I think the strength of Fawlty Towers was the scripts and the plot and the amount of time we put into them. And they are logically consistent. And there's also a lot in them because there was so much time spent in them. And that's what I'm most proud of.
You've referred a lot while we've been talking to the book you've written with Robin Skinner and going into therapy. Can you tell us about that? Did you become happier, more contented?
I think I simply became less frightened and therefore less uptight. Enormous number of people are very frightened of what is in themselves, and I'm much less frightened of what's in me now, because I've seen some of it, and you accept, all right, I have a lot of envy, I have not so much jealousy, I have quite a lot of anger, which is not still available to me properly. I have a slightly depressed side, which is infinitely better, but there's still a touch of it there. I have but they don't frighten me anymore.
Was there a sense, though, in which the fear that you had was like the lid on the cauldron that drove the steam engine forward?
Oh, yeah.
And that taking that lid off means that the steam is released, but then so is the forward movement of the engine.
Absolutely. I've become sort of resolutely less hard-working. And I really question now whether I feel I need to be very productive for the rest of my life. It may be that I change my mind, but I don't feel any of that work ethic anymore.
What if I suggested that, just as a suggestion, I don't know whether it's true or not, of course, is that some of your best writing came out of an unawareness of what you had in you. Is that a proposition?
Could be. It could be. And it doesn't bother me at all. Because I know I have one particular friend who says that he does not want any psychiatry because he thinks it will affect his work. And for me, my life is infinitely more important than my work. And if I was given a choice between one of those very comfortable Victorian portrait painters and Van Gogh, I would take the portrait painter every time. I see no point in unnecessary suffering. Although I'm amused at a quote from Gurdjieff, which is that man will give up almost anything but his suffering. I think there's a great deal of truth in that.
Thank you very much.
What was that? That was your life, mate. Oh, that was quick. Do I get another? Sorry, mate, that's good luck.